Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Varsha Bajaj. Varsha is a New York Times best-selling author of the middle grade novel Thirst. Thirst was a global read aloud, 2223, and on the Bluebonnet list, 2324. Her other middle grade novels include Count Me In and Abby Spencer Goes to Bollywood. She had the privilege of helping to create and write the books for the American Girl doll Kavi Sharma. It's Showtime, Kavi. Varsha also writes picture books. Her latest picture book is called A Garland of Henna. Welcome, Varsha.
Thank you, Tom. I'm so happy to be here.
And I am so happy to have you here. Very excited. So let's start with having you describe your career path. How did you get to here?
Wow. Yes, that my career path has been unexpected. That's the best word to describe it because I've always been a reader, but I never saw myself as a writer. And you could call writing my second career. So I came to this country in 1986 as a graduate student, and I got my master's and almost doctorate in psychology. And I worked for many years in St. Louis as a biobehavioral therapist in the hospital. And I fell in love with picture books when I had kids because I started reading to them. It's just something that came naturally because I was a reader. I, of course, had to read to them. And like many others, I thought picture books seemed easy. They're not. They're probably the most difficult to write. But when you're starting out and you don't know a whole lot, you venture into adventures that maybe I wouldn't have if I'd known more about picture books, but I'm glad I did. And my first picture book was How Many Kisses Do You Want Tonight? It was published in 2004 by Little Brown. And so it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and it is still in print, which feels like a miracle.
For sure.
And that's how I got started.
What made you decide to become a writer? What is it that moves you in that direction?
I do love words. I have been a voracious reader. And picture books, to me, feel like poetry. And it's what drew me to write picture books or to try to write picture books. And then as my kids got a little older, I realized in the early 2000s, late 90s, when I went to the public library, that I wanted to see more diverse books. I wanted to see books with all kinds of kids, and I wanted to see books that were set in different parts of the world. And I think that is what drew me to try my hand at telling my stories. I grew up reading a lot of Western authors. I grew up in Mumbai, India, and I grew up reading British authors and American authors. And I felt like they invited me into their worlds through their books, and I wanted to do the same for readers.
I like that. As much as I like Beverly Cleary, for example, from my
Hmm.
childhood, as much as I appreciated her and the Mouse and the Motorcycle and all of those,
I love her.
very, very white. And that was everything I read because that's what was available. Uh, Seems like we're doing better now, but still, it's a little problematic.
We're doing so much better. I
Mm,
mean, we've come a long way since the late 90s. We really have. And I think, yes, we have a ways to go, but I think that, when I see the progress of the last 20 years,
right.
I feel encouraged.
Oh, absolutely. So I read one of your books, A Garden of Henna. Great book.
Oh,
Great, great
thank you.
book. How did you come up with the idea for it?
Garland of Henna.
Oh, there you go.
Um, I lost both my parents between 2016 and 2020. And it was 2021, I was actually writing Thirst. And there was something I was trying to remember. And I reached for the phone and then realized there's nobody to call.
Mm,
And there was this feeling or realization that, there's so many stories and skills and recipes that we pass from one generation to another. And they're important. They're part of who we are. Um, and so I wanted to write a story that was intergenerational.
mm,
I wanted to include passing of a skill from one generation to another. Around the same time, as no book is directly a result of any one thought. Around that same time, I'd also been reading about the growth mindset.
mm,
And I found myself thinking about it. We kind of sometimes assume that we either innately have the ability or the skill or we don't.
right.
And we make decisions based on that. Like I decided kind of early that I was not the most athletic. And I just then thought, I should try something different. But did I put in the effort? I don't know if I did.
Mm,
And I think that while innate ability and talent is definitely important, what we put into it, to learning, to practicing, to working hard matters just as much. And so I wanted to incorporate that into the story, and that's how Garland of Henna came about.
oh, such a good book.
Thank you.
So, young lady from Mumbai, and you become a best-selling New York Times author. What was that like?
So the cliche is that it was surreal. So here's the thing, I truly did not expect it.
Mm,
Truly didn't expect it. I mean, I'm being honest. Um, because when I first had the thought for writing Thirst, I didn't even know if it would be published,
right.
right? I mean, none of us do. But there are all these things that float around, like, books set in another country with a character from another culture don't do as well. You know, uh, I don't know where they come about, but these kind of myths or rumors go float around. And I had heard them and I thought, I don't know. I don't know if anybody will pick this book up, this story. So I started out with that, and then for it to become a New York Times bestseller, it just felt truly unexpected.
Because there is no rhyme or reason to it. If it had dropped at a different time of year, maybe it would have been completely different. It a little bit because I do track when books come out, and so what else came out that day, that month? It's
I don't know, and I think having it uh, become a selection for Global Read Aloud probably contributed, but you know, there's no way of knowing.
right.
Um, but it was a wonderful surprise. Let's put it that way.
Nice. So what's next for Varsha?
Um, I am working on a new middle grade, and I believe it comes out in May of 2026. Um, and it's the story of a boy and a few tigers.
Oh,
And it's set in a tiger sanctuary in India. Um, I also have a few picture books that are lined up. One that comes out next year, which is called Family of Friends, and it's illustrated by Isha Lobo. Um, and again, that one was inspired by the fact that in this last, whatever, 50 or so years, we've all become so mobile and spread apart. Whether you're an immigrant or not, that's a whole other uh, movement. But even my friends who are American, their parents are on the West Coast, the East Coast. Everybody is all spread out, but we still keep our family, and then we form families of friends. And
mm,
I think
I like.
those, right, and those families that we form, um, that are made up of friends, are so important to us. So that's what that picture book's about. And then I have a couple more. Um, I believe one in 26, or no, 26 is next year. No, 25 is next year. So 26 and 27 and 28, something like that.
I always like to point out to my listeners and to anybody. So that's like 4 or 5 books that you have that you're all working on at the same time. I don't think people realize that's a little bit that's how you have to make a living as a writer. Is it's often not one book in the pipeline, it's multiple.
The picture books, honestly, though, are done. My role is done, and they are in the hands of illustrators,
Mm,
and they are doing their bit. So I am right now focusing on my middle grade, my next middle grade. Uh, and sometimes I do work on a middle grade and maybe a picture book, but I rarely work on, I don't believe I've ever worked on more than one middle grade at a time. I focus on one.
that would just be too. I get your thinking. That would just be too confusing for me. I mean,
Yeah,
with a picture book, it's shorter, and you can,
yes.
and it's very different. But that would be
Yeah,
very
because
different.
with the middle grade, I really want to get into the skin of that character, and I don't want anything competing with that, So I don't work on more than one middle grade at a time.
I like the idea of a family of friends. I have one of those families. I have three children. One child lives in Chicago, one child lives in St. Louis, and
Oh,
one child lives in, as of the end of this month, Germany.
wow. See,
Yep.
there you go.
Yep. It's
You're all spread out.
so that's why I'm going to Germany at Christmas.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah, Christmas markets, all that.
That'll be so amazing.
What advice do you have for new writers?
My first advice is read. I remember many years ago when I was first starting out, a speaker at a SCBWI conference said, if you want to write a book in a particular genre, read 100 other
Mm,
books written in that genre, or even 1,000. And I think it's the best advice I ever got. Um, you really need to study and read what's been written in that genre. So that would be my advice. And my other advice is be kind. Because, sometimes we have a tendency to compare our first draft or second or third to a finished book.
mm,
And nothing good is going to come out of that,
right.
because you don't know where that author started, where that writer started, because writing really is about rewriting. So if you compare your first draft or any early draft to a finished book, you're doing yourself a disservice. So be kind.
I like that.
And when I'm doing a first draft, I try to shut my editor down, in my head, my
Mm.
own, the editor in my head. I try to shut that down because it's too early to edit. You just have to write it.
That's I think good. I just got that advice in an earlier podcast this morning I was recording, and Rudis Apetis and Steve
Steve
Shenkin,
Schenken.
uh, for their new book, it was exactly the same thing. Is sort of get it on paper, then you can
Yeah,
fix that. But that first
you
draft is going to be bad, and that's just the reality,
right, because you can't revise a blank page.
right?
I mean, I wouldn't know how to revise a blank page, so just get it down. And in those early stages, be kind to yourself.
What advice do you have for writers who are writing cross culturally? I imagine that your books are read more by Americans than they are by people from India.
Yeah.
Just a sheer numbers sort of thing. Uh, what advice do you have for folks doing that?
I grew up reading Anne of Green Gables and Nancy Drew, uh, among others. I didn't care that I had nothing in common with Anne. Her problems seemed real to me, and I worried about her. And I thought of that long and hard. And I think that you have to create a character that feels real.
Hmm.
That is the most difficult thing and the most important thing. Because if you create a character who feels real, kids will identify with that character. And I have been visiting innumerable schools across the country, and I am just amazed at the reaction. There was a little girl who ran up to me in Westchester County, New York, between presentations. And she came to me, Caucasian girl, and she said to me, "Do you think Minnie would want to be my best friend?" And I was about this close to bawling
Oh, I can
because,
imagine.
because I thought, okay, this is what I did all those drafts for. Because if she feels real to this little girl who wants to be her best friend, then I succeeded. So I would say work really hard to make your characters jump off the page.
Hmm. What is a book or a series of books from your childhood that still resonate with you?
Um, well, I've mentioned Anne, I've mentioned Nancy Drew, and some people, some reviewers called Thirst a literary mystery, and
Hmm.
I think that um, that that whole Nancy Drew thing has come seeped into my writing because I liked. I was a page turner, and and as a child, I needed that plot to keep me turning pages. So I think I've been influenced by all of those books that I read as a kid. But um, to go back to Anne, she was an orphan, and I worried all through that book that they were going to send her back to the orphanage. Now, boy, those were some stakes.
Right.
So I, I just loved my books. I loved that they took me to all these different parts of the world. And I think kids have a hunger for that.
Hmm. What are you reading now?
Um, I am reading Finding Margaret Fuller. It's an adult novel by Alison Pataki, and it's amazing. Um, it's set in the 1800s. But before I started that, I finished Elf, Dog, and Owl Head by M.T. Anderson.
Nice.
So I kind of I alternate between a middle grade and then an adult book.
I tend to do that too. You want to keep current with what kids are reading, of course, but also you have interest in what adult books are like. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I'm reading right now. I have a stack on my bedside table, and there's always books to be read.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Varsha, for coming on the Book Flood podcast. I greatly appreciate it. For our listeners, please like, subscribe, and share wherever you are listening to us at. Again, thank you, Varsha.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the love for A Garland of Henna.
Thank you.